Hello and welcome to this week's Weekly Wind-Up. My name is David Ridgway. The Weekly Wind-Up can be contacted by email at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com or on Twitter at The Weekly Wind-Up and on Facebook. We have two very different topics for this week's show. The European Referendum, now there's a bag of nails, and also assisted dying in the UK. My two guests joining us today are Denzil nurse and Alison Munro. Welcome to you both.
Okay.
So, the first topic. In the Conservatives' general election manifesto this year, there was a promise to hold a referendum before the end of 2017. The question we'll ask, should Britain remain a member of the European Union? There are some Tories who believe and state that Britain is being held back by the EU. They say European bureaucracy imposes too many rules on businesses. The annual charges for membership total billions of pounds each year, for which there is very little in return. The internal accounts are in a mess. Too much control is exercised by Eurocrats who have not even been elected. That reform is long overdue. They also want Britain to take back full control of its borders and reduce the number of people coming here to work. One of the main principles of EU membership is free movement, which means you don't need to get a visa to go and live and work in another EU country. And indeed, you can move your goods and chattels around without any difficulty either. So what do the residents of Huddersfield think about the European referendum?
I think this is a really difficult one because I think if we stay in, we've got the protection of the other countries, but if we come out, can we actually financially be as viable as we were when we were in, if you get my gist. So it's a difficult one. If we come out, can we sustain ourselves financially? But if we stay in, I think we've got the protection of the other countries that are in the EU.
At the moment, it's not really big on my agenda. I'm not really sure it's going to affect me.
To be honest, I don't really have a massive opinion. I know about it, but I'm not really sort of opinionated each way. I think if I had to pick one way, it would be to stay, because I think we do get lots of benefits from other countries, lots of business and things like that. So if I had to pick, I would pick for us to stay in the EU.
When we vote, have the referendum, we should vote to stay in Europe. And the reason for that is the majority of our trade is done within the European community, and we don't want to be setting up any sort of economic barriers between us and Europe. Britain is a small country. I think the more friends we have in Europe, the better. And I think that in a sort of globalised world, obviously we need to look far afield to the new emerging economies, but I think we need to focus on where our main trade is as within Europe.
So Alison, I'll come to you first. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Will leaving the EU benefit Britain?
Well, my personal views are that I think in the long term, no. Mainly because I do believe that with the effects of climate change that will take place, I believe will take place, that will have an adverse action upon our climate here. Will we be able to grow crops in the future? Will we be able to sustain ourselves? Our children's futures, will they be able to get jobs here? I mean, our manufacturing industry has shrunk. A lot of our traditional industries, have gone elsewhere, for the Far East, Asia, Spain, Portugal for clothing. Where are our children going to go if they can't get jobs here? How are they going to make a living for themselves? So I think the fact that we are in Europe is good for our young people and their futures, and it means that they can move freely around in those countries, just as those people who live in the other countries within the European Union can come to our country and get jobs here. So from those perspectives, I think in the long term, I don't think coming out of the EU would benefit Britain.
Do you concur with those thoughts, Denzil?
To part, yes. I think the question is loaded actually, whether we come
it's meant to be.
whether we in our should be based on the facts, on more information to us so that we can make an informed decision. At the moment, in or out is not conclusive enough.
Well, facts have been very difficult to come by because we've been in Europe now since the 1970s, and good old Ted Heath took us in. Harold made sure we stayed there with a referendum, and for good or ill, we've been there, and the press has been pretty anti-Europe ever since, and because the press is pretty anti-Europe, we get no information through their pages as to what Europe has done for us.
But I think we need to search for it.
I think you're right.
I think we need not only to depend on the different parties, but we need to look at institutions like the universities, who has facts and figures.
Yeah.
And are not biased one way. I think they're not biased one way or another. And for them to engage with the community, put the pros and cons, the benefits, and so on.
But the point I'm trying to make, Denzil, is will the pros and the cons be put fairly by the press?
But I'm not looking at the press.
Well, that's where everything sort of starts from, isn't it?
But let's look at other areas then. Let's look at, as I say, the universities and other communities.
Yeah, but yes, I think you're absolutely right. But do the universities have the same facilities of getting their thought processes, ideas, and indeed promote their beliefs? Do they have those facilities to get that into the public arena?
I mean, just going. Yeah, I think basically, I think what you're saying is that they need some form of media to be able to help them, and I think the press is very biased, as has been shown with Nigel Farage's campaign coming up to the general election. He was on television all the time.
Well, much more so during the European elections.
Precisely, and he was getting all the coverage. And I think if my personal view is that effectively all this extra media has given the public in Britain a false view of Europe, actually, and so it's actually fueled the thought process of people wanting to actually leave Britain.
I mean, I sometimes wonder how many people in West and South Yorkshire know what benefits have come to West and South Yorkshire from Europe. Do you know?
No, I'm afraid I don't,
know?
actually, David. No.
I don't know, but
I can give you two.
They should be exposed.
Well, I'm not quite sure that I'd use the word exposed, but there certainly
should be given.
Yes, I can give you two. First of all, partly funded by Europe was the reopening of the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. Mm-hmm. There is no European acknowledgement of that anywhere on the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. Mm-hmm. And mainly funded by Europe was the regeneration of the South Yorkshire coalfield. Nowhere in South Yorkshire will you find a European flag flying. Now, if the same thing was happening in Belgium, France, Germany, wherever, you would see European flags flying saying, this is what we have done for you.
Not only that, you have training coming from Europe for groups.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know, about £1 million come to Yorkshire, West Yorkshire alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we strayed massively from where I'm supposed to be. So,
we digress.
If Britain actually says no, how will this benefit the United Kingdom? And indeed, if Britain says no, what will happen in Scotland?
Well, I think in the short term, I think the money that they will, i.e. at the moment they pay huge amounts of membership fees, I understand. So effectively, immediately we'll have extra money because I understand that figure is millions. So billions. We'll have billions, in fact. So we'll have that extra money in our economy, circulating around in our economy. We're not going to benefit from it because if we haven't got any, we've no industry, our industry, as I say previously, have shrunk. So where are our future jobs coming from? How are we going to run the country in the future? So from a short-term perspective, I think probably we will benefit, but in the long term, I don't think we will.
Okay.
I think I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, now the Scottish question is actually quite important. It's a far more important question than the West Lothian question, which I never really understood. I gathered the answer was, I don't know. It might have been 42. But the Scottish question is this. Scotland has stated categorically it will stay in the Union. Britain votes to come out. What happens to Scotland? Will coming out of the Union effectively break up the United Kingdom?
If we come out and Scotland stay in, I could imagine that, yes, that would be a...
Scotland at the moment can't stay in.
But yes, that would be a natural progression, of course. That would happen.
Right. Will Britain miss out on the free movement of trade and people? Will there be an encouragement to create a Little England closed economy like the USA had during Prohibition? Or will there be a greater encouragement to trade in worldwide markets? I mean, when you listen to the anti-European press, which is pretty well all the press, you get the feeling that if we stay in Europe, we won't be able to trade with the rest of the world. We're in Europe. We've been in Europe for 40, maybe nearly 50 years. Do we trade with the rest of the world, Alison?
Well, I think we trade within the European Union and we trade with the rest of the world as well. But my understanding is that we have greater bargaining power within the EU for contracts and deals and bringing big projects to the UK. So I imagine that life would probably continue if we came out of the Union. That it would continue. We'd still be trading with other countries within the world, and the EU potentially. But whether we'd have whether we'd be able to have as much of the lion's share of that trade, I don't know.
So is this business of world trade and European trade a bit of a red herring? What do you think, Denzil?
Yes, I think so. I think people are putting too much pressure on the European part of it. If we come out of Europe, if we come out of Europe, yes, we will trade with the rest of the world. My bias is that we stay in because we have a greater collective bargaining within the European Union.
Okay.
So my point is to stay.
So how
stay,
will
but we can renegotiate.
That's opening up a massive area for discussion, which is coming on in a moment.
Yeah.
So how will the referendum change our relationship within the European Union? Is membership of the EU restrictive or beneficial to trading with nations outside the EU? Well, I think you both said that it's really irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
Although you get greater bargaining power if you're in. And I have to say that those countries which are in Europe geographically but outside the EU, they're not quite as strong as EFTA used to be, because EFTA is already mainly in Europe now anyway. So there we go. So what happens to those migrants who are held in camps in Calais if the UK leaves the EU?
Well, I like to call them the people from fleeing countries who are experiencing hardship and terror, whatever that may be, famine or whatever. But I personally feel that I think we'll probably see more of them coming, because I think Europe will think, well, we'll just send them on the way to Britain, basically.
But it's a really interesting point, this. Irrespective as to how you feel whether Britain's borders should be open or closed, it's an interesting point that within the EU laws and rules, an economic migrant is supposed to be looked after by the country within the Union that first receives that migrant. So can you tell me why France is sending them all to Britain?
Well,
is it one rule for France and a rule for everybody else?
I personally think that there is some hostility, I think, underlying all this between the French and the English, which has been going on historically for a long time.
Well, just because they lost Agincourt.
Oh, it must be.
or indeed Waterloo.
Yeah, something like that. But I do think there's a certain resentment, and I think they just think, well,
I have to say, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
yeah.
but did you know that the French do not refer to the Battle of Waterloo? They refer to it as the Battle of La Haye Sainte.
No, didn't know that.
Oh, well, there you go.
Oh.
It's a little bit of information for you today. But I have to say that I actually like the French a lot. And I like the way they do their business, because they look at their set of rules and they say, this is a good one, we will keep this. I don't like that too much, we will put that under the table. And life goes on, and no one really cares too much. And yet here we get full of an enormous amount of angst, and you then get some pettifogging person in some bureaucratic place who says, no, you can't do that, and you're fined, whatever. And this is not good, is it, really?
Can I come back to
Denzil, you can.
the point about the French is sending them over to England?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure if that's the case.
Well, they're not doing much about keeping them there.
Well, no, it's because England is more attractive to them,
Than France.
to the immigrants.
Why do we
That's
all,
why they're coming.
I think-
why do we
yeah,
all go and have our holidays in France then?
No, what I'm putting the ball back into the immigrants' court, and they
Indeed.
choose
Yeah,
to come to
I think
Britain
that's right.
because it's perceived and seen as if it's a harmonious,
A safer haven?
a safer haven,
Yeah.
A better
much
place.
a better place to be, you know, and that's why they're here.
Which,
Whether it's through their welfare state and welfare benefits is another matter, and that is what needs to be negotiated so that it would offer a deterrent to people choosing to come to Britain.
So if Britain came out of the EU, will economic migrants still be able to access Britain?
By boat, probably.
I think so. I think we'll still be able to.
Only.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think they will.
The human rights would determine that happens.
So, well, from your answers, it's obvious that the issue is of massive importance to many, many people. We've condemned the press for being biased, which I think is a fair condemnation. We need more information so that we can make informed choices on this matter, or an informed choice. The answer is not as simple as staying in or coming out, because there are so many checks and balances to look at. The answers are going to be different from the old people's perspective to the young people's perspective. There's massive opportunity for the young. There's perhaps less opportunities for the old, and perhaps that's how it's always has been and always is going to be. There's a lot to consider and to balance, but now is the time for some news in our local area. A £1 million revamp of the historic St George's Warehouse is planned. The Huddersfield Examiner on the 10th of August this year said that a sleeping Huddersfield giant is finally waking up. Work has started on a £1.1 million renovation project at St George's Warehouse, which is a 130-year-old listed building alongside the town's railway station. And developers hope that the remedial work will kickstart a major development project at the huge site. They are to look for tenants to move in once the work is completed. Previous plans for offices and exhibition rooms have been on hold for 5 years. Work on the former railway warehouse has begun. The firm has ambitious plans to ensure that the centrally located building becomes one of Huddersfield's hubs for leisure and business. It has housed events for the Festival of Light and even the creation of the bespoke farm set for Le Fun, the French farmers which kicked off Le Grand Départ as part of the Tour de France last year. ITV has also based their wardrobe and catering facilities in the building for the popular drama Black Work starring Sheridan Smith, and the warehouse was recently home to the University of Huddersfield's end-of-year photography exhibition. So, join us after the break when we will be talking about assisted dying. Remember, the weekly wind-up can be contacted by email at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com or on Twitter at The Weekly Wind-Up and on Facebook.
However large or small your business, attracting new customers requires dedication and a lot of patience. Just like fishing, but you also need the right gear. Rods,
reels, lines, hooks, sinkers, lures,
tackle box, tackle bag, net, bait, gas gloves, clothes, pocket knife, lunch.
Or you could simply advertise with KLTV. Online, grow your business and your clientele. KLTV, your vision made reality. Should have gone to KLTV.
So welcome back to this week's show. Welcome back, Alison. Welcome back, Denzil.
Thank you.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, assisted dying, let's have some more news from Kirklees. The Cowshed returns to John Smith Stadium after 21 years. A famous name from Huddersfield town folklore has been resurrected. The Cowshed, spiritual home to generations of town fans. The name, which refers to the most famous stronghold at the old Leeds Road site, has been painted on part of the John Smith South Stand used to house the away fans. Well, what's that all about? I mean, how can you have an iconic place to go and watch your football, the Cowshed, set to one side for the away fans? I mean, who makes these decisions? I mean, who? I just find it so odd and peculiar. I do hope people will phone in their droves and agree with me on this. How can Huddersfield Town get it so wrong? It's more than 21 years since the curtain was brought down on the Cowshed, and they've opened it up at the wrong end. But there you go. The last time it roared was April the 30th, 1994, when Town played Blackpool, and for some of the atmosphere has never been quite the same since. But the legend of the Cowshed has never gone away. In April, a minute's silence was held to remember devoted Town fan Chris Irish Harley, a father of two from Crossland Moor, who was known as the King of the Cowshed. The Cowshed was a genuinely raucous, swaying affair. Well, it won't be if it's at the away fans' end, will it? But there we are. A swaying affair for the Town fans. Just the mention of its name can evoke misty-eyed nostalgia, and it will remain as misty-eyed nostalgia forever. So let's move on to a rather more interesting topic, which is assisted dying. Assisted dying is when a terminally ill, mentally competent adult, making the choice of their own free will and after meeting strict legal safeguards, takes prescribed medication which will end their life. Assisted dying is currently illegal in the UK. The 11th of September will see this topic being debated in the House of Commons. Assisted dying only applies to terminally ill, mentally competent adults and requires the dying patient, after meeting strict legal safeguards, to self-administer. Assisted dying is legalised and regulated in the US states of Oregon and Washington. Assisted suicide allows assistance to die to chronically ill and disabled people who are not dying. Assisted suicide is permitted in Switzerland. Voluntary euthanasia allows a doctor to administer life-ending medication directly to the patient. Voluntary euthanasia is permitted in the Netherlands and Belgium. Euthanasia is a term often used to describe life-ending medication being administered by a third party, perhaps without the consent of the patient. What views do the residents of Huddersfield have on this very sensitive topic?
Yes, of course, I think so. Myself, I would, if I needed to, would like to be assisted in my dying rather than asking family or friend member to help me out.
In a personal view, when I'm thinking about that, without suffering, dying is okay. In my religion, I'm a Muslim. In my religion, it say it's haram, it's not good. Because that in that I'm in the middle. I don't know to say yes or no.
I feel like it should be legal for the people that are going through that kind of trauma, and if they feel like they know they can die because they're mentally capable of making their own decisions, I feel like it should definitely be made legal for those people.
I do, because obviously if people's terminally ill, they want out, and obviously if they're in pain, it's not fair on them, and if they want to go, they want to go.
So Denzil, tell me, do you think assisted dying should be made legal in the UK?
I think it should.
Why is that?
Why? Because if I'm chronically and terminally ill, with no hope of coming back, and I am mentally capable of making a decision, I think I should have that option of whether I want to go or not. And in that case, I think it should be made legal. Whether I am helped with it by doctors or whoever, I should be able to ask for that help, having my mental powers to think as straight as that. So I think it should be legal and offered as an option.
Okay. Alison?
Well, for me, I'm slightly different. I mean, for me, that I have a problem because I do feel that people should be free to be able to make their own choices and decisions in life. However, I'm a bit of a pro-lifer, and I think, for me, you know, life's a gift, and I think you should try and embrace that as much as possible. And however, I've, you know, not been in a position where I've been suffering, and I don't know what that's like. So for me, it's a very difficult one, and it's not something I could easily make a decision on.
A very typical Liberal position to be in, that you've got to balance the will of the individual and their rights against the desire for believing that life is sacrosanct. And I understand that. So how would you control the numbers of people who want assisted death?
Well, I think, do you want to...
No, Alison, you carry on.
Well, I think you need to bring in rules and regulations. You can't just have people turning up willy-nilly.
Can there be simplistic rules and regulations like tick box?
Well, I think that's the problem. I think it's a very difficult, very difficult area. A very difficult area indeed, both legally, morally, and but also you have to be aware that it can, rules and regulations can easily be breached, and there may be cases or issues where, somebody may be wanting to have somebody bumped off to inherit, or, you've got all those kind of issues going on.
Indeed.
So I think it's very difficult.
Who would you have filling in the form? The person who's dying or someone to assist? Because it's assisted dying.
Yeah, that's another difficult one. I mean, who fills the form?
Let me ask you this then. I'm sorry to interrupt your answer. Let me ask you this then. How early can the form be filled in? If we're working on a form basis, how early can it be filled in? I mean, if you're not going to die until, let's say, figure 85, can you fill it in when you're 20?
Well, I think that's where you're bringing in the issue of kind of like a living will, where you can actually incorporate that kind of thing into a will. But there again, I think that's also open to, who's going to write your will. Is precisely what you want at that time? When's that going to take effect?
But according to the courts, it doesn't matter if you've written a will anyway, because the courts can overturn them. You must have read last week about this lady whose will left all her estate to a charity, and her daughter, who had been cut off years before, contested it, and the judges said, yeah, you're right, you have the money. I mean, what's the point of having a will? Yeah,
I know.
So what's the point of filling in a form?
And also, who makes that decision? When does that take effect? That's a decision then that's left to a doctor or a medical person. And can they be wholly 100% trusted? Are they, are they going to benefit from it as well? There are so many issues that this brings into account.
So the guidelines would have to be really stringent.
Oh, very. Yeah.
Yes, people will make a decision at an appointed time. Whether that time is when they are at the point of dying, or whether they say, if it comes to that point, I want this action to be taken, then that could be written into what they want. Now, you asked the question, who is going to make the decision? Now, I think the courts has got to be involved.
The courts? The
courts, yes, I think so. And I think also, when the person gets to the point of having to be assisted in dying, I think the doctor, the doctor will have to make a representation to justify assisting that person in dying at that point. We take the request, but we also have to.
I understand that, and I understand the basis of why you're saying that, but I've got to ask you this question, Denzil. Have you ever been involved in the court system in this country? No. No. Okay. No. I have. I was a magistrate for 20 years. Yeah. And I have to say that if I'm going to be reliant on my assisted death on a court request, I'll be dead by the time they get to the answer anyway.
Right,
so, I mean,
it's just going to fill the courts.
Who would be the person that administered the medication? Would that be a doctor? Could it be just a nurse? Or could it be perhaps your best beloved?
I think it'd be a doctor.
A doctor.
In fact, the doctor do it now. The doctor does it now anyway, because if anybody is terminally ill, you get morphine.
Do you think the doctors do it already?
Yes, I do.
You do.
Well, I was a nurse. I know.
Well. Really? Oh my gosh, that's a shock.
You're given morphine.
Absolutely
at
right.
Increasing levels of morphine.
Absolutely right.
And to a certain point, morphine takes you away.
Yeah. Now, what I find so difficult to understand is that if I kept an animal alive when the humane decision would be to have it put down, then I would be guilty of animal cruelty. I'd be guilty in your eyes, I'd be guilty in your eyes, I'd probably be guilty in my eyes. Why then is this position so reversed and so often to the detriment of the person who is ill or in pain or determined to die? Now is the time for the final news story from Kirklees. So we've now finished that topic on assisted dying. Okay. And we're going to talk now very briefly about Huddersfield Examiner, 11th of August. Going balmy. There's a wooden sheep called Mint Sauce who was stolen from the back of a car, and a tongue-in-cheek reward is being offered for her safe return. Mint Sauce is part of a flock of 6 hardboard sheep, which have helped raise at least £5,000 for the Huddersfield-based Laura Crane Youth Cancer Trust in the last 2 years. The flock has been loaned out for a sheep racing fundraiser at the Huddersfield Irish Centre in July, but 2 of them were lifted while being loaded into a car. Pam Thomas saw the funny side and thought at first Mint Sauce may have made a bolt for freedom or for TV fame. It's funny, but it also has a serious side. This flock of sheep has raised a lot of money for us, she said, and we can't race with only 5 of them. I'd like to thank my guest, Denzil Nurse, for coming in today, and for Alison Munro for being with me and for giving me some really interesting topics to talk about. Many thanks to you all for watching the Weekly Wind-Up. Remember, the Weekly Wind-Up can be contacted by email at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com or on Twitter at the Weekly Wind-Up, and indeed on Facebook. Thanks for watching. See you next week.